Hello and welcome to my Hangout today. I'm Susan Woodcock, owner of HomeDeckGal.com. And I'm going to do a little check here to see if the chat's working, if anybody can view, and if you can hear me. So if you're there and you can click a chat message. I have chat open, I believe. And it doesn't appear that anyone can see me. I hope you can. It says that I'm live and that the broadcast is going, so I'm going to assume that it's working properly. And I'll just check email real quick to see if anybody's trying to get in. This is how it goes when it's live. And let's see. Looks okay. Nobody's complaining, so I guess we're going to go live and we're good. So thank you for joining me today. I'm Susan Woodcock, owner of HomeDeckGal.com, and I'm here in my studio, and I'm going to show you a new method for sewing rings on blackout lined Roman shades. I've been in the workroom business for 25 years, and it's taking me 25 years to figure this out. So it's really not that difficult, so I don't know what took me so long. But I'll share it with you today, and this Hangout will be recorded, so you can watch it on YouTube later if you'd like to try and experiment with this method later. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint presentation. And you should be seeing that now. So this is a photo of the shade. I made two shades in my studio to check how this process would work. This is one of the shades. I have a lot of sun exposure and direct sun most of the day, so these windows were perfect to experiment on. I'm just going to show you how to tack the rings on the back of the shade today. If you'd like to learn how to make Roman shades using all the latest cord safety products such as shroud tubes and shroud tapes and ladder tapes and ring locks, you can visit my website and you can purchase the recorded webinar that I did several weeks ago called When Cord Free is Not an Option, Roman Shade Construction for the Small Workroom. And that's $35, and you can purchase and view on demand. And after you buy the webinar, you can view it as many times as you like. So this was a very, very small part of that webinar, was showing the blackout line shades. So I'm going to just show you that now. A little bit of a delay in the slide, so I'll pause between each slide. So what exactly are pinholes of light? Blackout lining has layers of acrylic foam that are sprayed on a base material. In fact, there's 3 layers sprayed on a material, and that's why you often see blackout lining called 3-pass blackout. And that means there's 3 passes of the foam that's sprayed onto the material. This acrylic foam blocks all the light, but when you pierce it, when you sew rings onto the shade, you create a hole. You cannot avoid this. This applies to both machine sewing and hand sewing, as you can see in the photos. And it might not look like a big problem right here. It's a teeny, teeny, tiny little speck of light. But imagine how it would look with 35 rings tacked to a shade, or stitched down a side hem by machine. You have to be very careful when working with blackout, and remember that light is going to come through wherever the material is pierced. And I'm going to add now that this is going to be a very short presentation, because once I figured out how to tack rings differently, I realized how simple it was. And it's really, this isn't going to change the world, but I think it's a pretty neat method to try. So the testing methods, this is how I sort of experimented in my own studio, and I like to ask, what if? I often challenge students when I'm teaching classes to think, what if? What if I sewed something differently? What if I changed the order of sewing things? What if I cut differently? So you can teach yourself and learn new things by asking, what if? So the results, and this is one little sample I was working on a scrap of blackout lining. You can see all my notes. You can see some of them have check marks. Some of them are not so successful. I tried sewing on rings with only one strand of thread or 4 strands of thread, 1 pass, 2 pass, 3 passes of the needle and thread. I tried a zigzag stitch. I tried glue. You can see I glued a rib on. I tried all kinds of things, and I came up with 4 have check marks by them. 4 worked well. Only one of those was something that fit well into my fabrication style. The other ones were very cumbersome and awkward and almost impossible to do to create a shade efficiently. So what I learned was the number of strands of thread doesn't matter. And you do want your rings to be sewn on securely. They're going to be functioning at a window, in the sun, in the cold, moisture perhaps. So you do want to have, I like at least 4 strands of thread going around, either by having 2 strands on the needle and making 2 passes, or 4 strands and making 1 pass. If you're going to stitch twice through around the ring, just make sure you sort of hit the same holes and don't make sort of a zigzag motion, because that will make 4 holes instead of 2 holes. I've seen a lot of folks lately that are gluing their ribs to the blackout, and I've never done that, but you can see on the top photo there's a sample of a rib glued on there, and in the bottom photo you can see the impression of the rib. And that works great. I might try that on a future shade. I usually do rib pockets when I make a ribbed shade. I tried one where I actually stitched through a blackout patch. So there was a piece of blackout, a little square piece on the back, and I stitched through it. It worked great, but it was way too cumbersome. It would be really, really difficult to do that and then put the face fabric on. And then there was one that was the winner. So that's the best option, and that's coming up in the next slide. Or the next slides, I'll show you. So there's a better and best option with the blackout shades, lined versus interlined. This new method of tacking the rings, it works best if you're using interlining. But it works pretty darned good if you're using just blackout lining. So the photo on the top left, that's the better option. That's a shade with face fabric and blackout lining. You can see that one tack point in the center of the photo, where you can see just a little bit of light. It's sort of diffused light. It's not like a pinhole of light. It's sort of back there behind there. The fabric sort of diffuses it a little bit. This is improved over the traditional blackout shade. You sort of have to look for it. And in fact, when the shade is free hanging and at the window, I don't even notice these little impressions of light. I know where they are because I've been studying this and I've been working on this for several months. And when you push on the shade and push it against the window, you can see the light coming through the tack points more. So this is a better option than traditional blackout shade, but if you look at the photo below, it's another shade. I have 2 windows, so I did one with interlining, one without interlining. And the photo on the bottom left, that's with interlining. And you can see that tack point. It's almost in the same place as the one above, where you can see that little bit of light. Everything's sewn exactly the same by the same person in the same studio, but you don't have any light showing through at the tack point. And then the photo on the right is a sample of how I would have sewn shades, or I have sewn blackout shades and every other Roman shade with or without blackout lining. And that's to sew the rings on the back and catch your face fabric. And that's how the Pinholes of Light look. That's a perfect example of Pinholes of Light. And some clients are hugely disappointed when they pay for custom products and then they have Pinholes of Light showing. Certainly you can glue little blackout band-aids. You can paint goop on them. I worry about the wear flaking off or things like that, and it's really, really time consuming, especially to add those little patches around each ring. So I wanted a better way. Here's another example of the two windows, and the one on the left actually made a half shade, a mock-up, and pinned it to the bottom of the shade. This is the shade that has just blackout lining and no inner lining. So the photo at the left is blackout lining, no inner lining, and then there's a mock shade hanging from the bottom of the real shade, pinned to the bottom, and that one's sewn in the traditional way. So this gives you a better idea of how the light holes show. You can see in the shade above that's folded up, if you look for it, you can see the little bits of light, which are not as bad as what's below. So it's a better method, again, better. The one on the right is best. I have a fireplace sitting in here, so one's on the left of the fireplace, one's on the right. The shade in the photo on the right, this has inner lining, so you can see the difference. There's no Pinholes of Light showing. So the first part of this webinar, I'm going to show you how to do the blackout lining only, and then I'll show you how to do inner lining. It's basically exactly the same, except for you add inner lining. It's really not that complicated. Making Roman shades, this is just a rectangle of fabric. So this is a flat style Roman shade. So we're going to start by cutting the blackout lining to the exact finished width of the shade. Calculate your ring spacing, allowing for hems. On this shade, I'm using 2-inch side hems along the side, so you can see I have the 2-inch ruler in the photo on the left down the side, and then another ruler on the right at 2 inches. I have a 4-inch hem, so I'm coming up 4 inches before I mark the bottom rings. And you could also just put your shade together, fold in all your hems, put the lining in, and mark it right in your shade. But this is marking it before you put it into the shade. So with the blackout lining face up, and I do get a lot of folks ask me which side of the blackout lining is the right side. Whichever side you prefer, I prefer the side that looks woven, not the side that has the acrylic foam on it. As long as you just pick a side and stick with it, it doesn't matter. And it performs the same no matter which side is facing out. So as you can see, I'm marking my ring placement without the shade being put together yet. And the photo on the right is just showing how I mark rings. I do all my math and determine the placement, and then I just put little stickies of painter's tape on the ruler with a mark, so I can just go up the shade and mark, mark, mark as I go. Now we're going to sew on the shade rings. I have not put the shade together. So this was an aha moment for me, and maybe you're sitting there now going, aha, I see what she's doing now. I'm sewing the shade rings to the blackout at all the marks. I'm yet making 2 passes with a double thread, so I end up with 4 strands of thread. You could also do 1 pass with 4 strands of thread. I find I get tangled up if I have too many strands of thread in the needle. You want to make sure you knot everyone securely, just like any other shade that you're making. And you'll sew on all the rings. And then you'll set that piece of blackout lining aside. Be sure to make to have the shade rings running in the correct orientation. Since you're just sewing rings on a piece of lining, it's easy to get turned around, especially if your shade was you know, 60 inches wide and 58 inches long, you would be confused about which way the rings are supposed to be sewn. So you can make a mark. It's blackout lining. You can draw a little arrow on the edges or on the bottom, or a pin, or a piece of tape with the arrow on it, just to keep you going in the right direction. For sewing rings, I like to use a good quality thin needle, like the John James or Colonial brand needles. I like darners, long darners, size 7. And Coats & Clark hand quilting thread to sew on the rings. This is my favorite supplies. You might like using a different needle and thread, and if it works for you, then it's perfect. But I'm just sharing with you what I use. So now the face fabric is cut and the hems are pressed in the sides and the bottom. Whatever hem sizes you use works fine. Sometimes I have the same size hem going around all 3 sides. For this shade, I have a 4-inch hem in the bottom and 2-inch hems in the sides. So just substitute your shade method here. And with the shade fabric face down on the work table, you'll place the blackout lining with the rings all sewn on top of the fabric and centered. Make sure you have the bottom at the bottom. Now we're going to tack the rings to the face fabric. To do this, you'll fold back the lining lengthwise along a column of rings that's at the center of the shade. When you do that, you'll see the little ring stitches where you stitched each ring to the shade on the back along that fold. And that's the bottom left photo. You can see that little stitch point, that little tack point. And one of the things I forgot to mention was one of the great things about this method is you can use white thread on white lining, or khaki thread on khaki lining, or ivory thread on ivory lining. You don't have to match the don't have to match the thread to the fabric on the lining. So you don't have to have red thread showing on your white lining, for example, because you're sewing them all on first. So now I'm going to tack the lining to the face fabric. And as you can see, I'm using an orange thread. So I can match the thread to the face fabric at this point. I'm threading the needle with a double thread knotted at the end. Pass the needle under those stitches. I'm not catching the blackout lining. I'm passing the needle under those 4 strands of thread, and then back up through that loop that's created with the double thread. And then I'm going to create what is called a French tack. It's also referred to as a daisy chain or a crochet tack. That's about 1/4 inch long. I made 4 chain loops. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then end it off by running through the last loop, and it knots itself. I did try not doing the daisy chain and just making 4 strands of thread, a little flat tack, for example, but I found it hard to keep it consistent, and you want each one of these tack points to be the same distance from the face fabric. So it was much easier just to do the daisy chain and go 1, 2, 3, 4, end it. So each one of these is 1, 2, 3, 4. You might want to try doing 3 or 2 or 5, but this has worked great for me. You could also use multiple colors of thread. If you had a stripe fabric, for example, you could thread up some needles with a blue and a green and a yellow, and then as you got to that color stripe, you could tack all your tack points with a matching thread. To speed it up, after I did one shade where I did each daisy chain, tacked it to the face fabric, knotted it off, trimmed the thread, I realized it's blackout lining. You don't see the floating threads. So just do a big long piece of double thread and just go from each tack point, leaving the floating threads between. You don't have to clip the threads. So at each daisy chain, I'm taking a tack through to the face fabric, and you can see that in the photo at the top right. This is somewhat like interlocking curtain layers for the English curtain method for sewing draperies, except they don't do a daisy chain, and although it's not a bad idea. I might try this on some curtain panels sometime. So after one column of rings is complete, you'll fold the lining over to the next column and tack all the way down, tacking the tack point of the rings to the face fabric with a little French tack or daisy chain. And you're working from the inside out. After the ring tacking is complete, then you can fold in your side and bottom hems, and you'll want to finish those by hand sewing, catching the lining only. You don't need to catch the face fabric, and if you do catch the face fabric, it's going to leave a pinhole of light. So you're just catching the blackout lining, and the rings are all holding the lining in place, so you don't have to worry about the lining shifting. And then you can finish the shade as you normally would. Add your weight bar. You can use a cord shroud, as is shown here, ring locks, ladder tape, and just finish, attach it to your lift system, add your warning tag and your tension device, and get it prepared to go out the door. So the only difference in making the Roman shades is just how you're tacking the rings. It's not how you make the shade at all. And there's the finished shade. So that's the one that has just blackout lining. And I'm checking the chat questions, and if for some reason it doesn't appear that the chat messages are either showing up for me or it's disabled for some reason. So if you want to ask a question and you're unable to during the Hangout, please get in touch with me through Facebook or on the YouTube video or on Google+, or you can always email me. So now let's look at part 2, making the same shade with blackout lining and heavy inner lining. And I did use Hanes Out Black on these two, the cotton substrate blackout lining. So you're going to follow the previous instructions, but before adding the blackout lining to the shade, you'll place your inner lining next to your face fabric and tuck it under the hems, just like if you were making the shade normally, but then you put your blackout lining with all the rings attached over the inner lining. Then you'll interlock the lining to the face fabric of the shade and the face fabric, stitching through the inner lining into the face fabric at each tack point. You'll do a daisy chain, stitch it through, knot it off, go to the next one. Catch the threads that are sewing the ring on, make a little chain, tack it through to the face fabric, move on to the next one. And once you interlock all the blackout lining to the face fabric with the inner lining, complete your shade. This one has ladder tape and a roller lift system. So it's exactly the same, you're just adding inner lining. And this one did perform the best. I use it every day. I'm looking at it right now. I also tried this with sheer fabric with inner lining and blackout lining, and I was very happy with the results. Again, if you push on the shade and push it up against the glass, you could get light to come through. But this was a sample I made and hung on my back door, which gets tons of sunlight, and I was really, really happy with the results. I'm not sure how long this trend of blackout lining sheer is going to last, but it's very popular right now. And for the sheer shade, it's pretty much the same way. I put all the rings on the blackout first, but when I'm doing sheer lined and interlined draperies or shades, I like to roll the inner lining into the side hem and bottom hem. So that's the difference on this, is the inner lining is cut larger than the Blackout to fold once into the side hems and bottom hem. And then it's exactly the same by going from each ring, stitching through the threads, doing a little chain, 4 loops, 4 times, tacking it through to the face fabric and going to the next one. Be sure you knot each time. You don't want those floating threads to be pulling against the last one. And you also don't need to pull them taut. You can let there be a little bit of slack in the floating threads that go from each tack point. And you can also trim them if you want to. When you get to the end, you can go back and trim them off. So here's some final notes, and here's a little photo of an inside view of how that tack point looks with the light coming through. Results may vary based on the fabric and lining combination, the sun exposure, and your individual shade fabrication techniques. I've made, I think, 7 shades now using this technique. I've had great results. But I haven't used any really challenging fabrics. I've used the same lining and inner lining, so I don't know how it would perform with maybe a polyester blackout lining. The sheer shade that I showed, I actually used a flame retardant blackout lining because I had a leftover piece, and that worked okay. I haven't tried it with French blackout yet, which I find doesn't show pinholes of light as bad. So it's an experiment, it's new, and I hope that you will make maybe a small sample using this method combined with your shade fabrication techniques to see how much longer it takes, see how it works. You might want to offer this to your clients or just make it standard on blackout shades, but you need to understand how much longer it might take so that you can price differently if needed. I found that it didn't overall take that much longer because sewing the rings on the blackout went so much faster. When I was sewing rings on shades previously, you're sewing through the lining and catching the face fabric and maybe inner lining, and you're more careful. Sewing the rings on the blackout, you can do it, with it in your lap, watching TV. You don't have to have it on the work table. You don't have the face fabric and inner lining. So that part was faster. And doing the French tacks, I got really fast at it. So make some samples. That's the best way to learn how much longer it would take for you. And I would love it if you would report your results. You can do that on my Facebook or Google Plus page. You can email me anytime. I want you to share your experience. I'm sharing this with you so that we all can learn together and come up with better ways to make blackout shades. So thank you for attending this live Hangout on Air. I'm really disappointed that I'm not seeing any chat questions, so I'm going to switch from the webinar view and see if I can get them to come up to see if I have any questions. And you can be sure to check out all the social media networking that's going on here on Twitter, Pinterest, Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn. I have a class on Craftsy. I'm a member of the Window Coverings Association of America. And you can visit my YouTube channel to see this video and other videos. So I'm going to switch back now to where you can see me. And I see I have a lot of viewers, but I'm getting a message that the Q&A is disabled. So let's see if I can get the chat to work. And I'm not seeing any chat. Oh well, I'm disappointed. I was hoping that we could have a little interaction here and you could ask questions and I could maybe learn something from you during the presentation. But I really appreciate you joining me. I do see the list of people that are here, and it's been great fun to share this. I've had really good response from the presentation that I did before the webinar, and from showing this locally. And I hope that maybe you had an aha moment and that you'll stay in touch and let me know how this works for you. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.